everybody to the ESC Conference Faculty Panel. We're glad that you're here. I'm the, really not so much maybe the moderator, but the introducer and the concluder. And my name's Katherine Bruna, and I'm from Iowa State University. I'm going to introduce the panel. I'm going to give you a sense of the task that they've put themselves up to in our time together, and I'll introduce our important timekeeper. So we have, in order, my left to right, we've got Pauline Johnson from the University of Alabama. We have Mayan from the University of Alberta. We have Tracy Eells from Lousville University. Andrew Furco from University of Minnesota, Furco, excuse me. And we have Lynnette Overby from the University of Delaware. We have the timekeeper over here, Nina Shepard from the Office for Public Engagement, the very important role of timekeeper. And our panelists are going to speak to two questions. Nina will make sure that they stay within their allotted minutes. That'll give us actually plenty of opportunity at the end for questions. And I will stir the pot if I need to. If we need some help with questions, I'll come up with some good stumpers. And I'd like to keep us here till the end because I think we can have a really important conversation. So this is what the panelists are speaking to this afternoon. They've been asked to describe their academic and personal journey as a disciplinary scholar with a community engagement focus. And they've been asked to provide recommendations for encouraging more faculty to pursue research and creative activities with a community engagement focus. So with that, I ask that you welcome our ESC conference faculty.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'll start off with a quote from the fabulous statesman Mark Twain, who said, "Ask me to speak for 10 minutes and it'll take me a week to prepare. Ask me to speak for an hour and I'm ready now." So I'll try and keep this brief. My name is Pauline Johnson. I'm from the University of Alabama. I'm going to talk about what I did, how I did it, and things that worked in regard to engaged scholarship. So my TMP path started in 1985 when I was employed by the University of Alabama as an assistant professor with a specialty in water and wastewater treatment. And I was employed by the College of Engineering, the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. I got tenure in 2001, so I didn't start my engagement activities until after that because there really wasn't much going on campus, and there certainly wasn't a climate within my college for encouraging that. You were encouraged to, when you were hired in, stick with what you knew, which was your PhD work, because you're basically a world expert in that area, and keep doing that until you get tenure. That was the advice from mentors that was given to the faculty, and it's pretty good advice actually, if you want to be successful in getting tenure. But then, the university got serious about being an engaged university. We had community affairs just come along and start talking to faculty about it and getting faculty involved. And that was something I really felt, really drawn to do. As an engineer, you're interested in projects and getting things done, and working with communities seemed like a worthwhile mission. So myself and my husband, with the encouragement of community affairs, started Engineers Without Borders, and this was our inaugural class at the national conference in 2005. In 2007 then, I was denied promotion to full professor. I can talk more about that during the question time, but it's funny because my own college panels, they kind of cited my service learning activities and my time out of the lab and in the community as one of the main reason for that. But then in 2009, I was successful with my promotion, so it does have a happy ending. So our initial motivation, and I should say, when I say I here, I mean we. The handsome man on the right is my husband, Philip Johnson, who was my partner in this. He was also a faculty member, a construction engineering faculty member. So our initial motivation was engagement, just these fabulous opportunities to give our students service learning experiences with communities in Alabama and internationally, and later to incorporate scholarship into our engagement activities. So our initial support came from VP Samori Pruitt, the Division of Community Affairs, and he was just really supportive. We didn't have money for pizza, for meetings or anything, so he was very supportive in giving us money for that, giving us seed money to get projects going, and this just, made a huge difference to us getting off the ground. Our own college was still kind of lagging in terms of realizing this was an important activity for students, but our students were not lagging. Our organization quickly became, the most well-attended engineering student organization on campus, and we just had fabulous students just dying to get involved in these projects. Just holding them back and restraining them was the main challenge. So these were some of the projects that we did. We did local projects in Alabama, Black Belt, and international projects, mostly in Peru, but we also had a Vietnam, Cambodia trip as well. And the main goal of our Engaged Scholarship was improved infrastructure in underserved communities, because that's what engineers do. So our international activities centered around mostly sanitary projects, wastewater, on-site wastewater treatment in Amazonian villages, and also drinking water projects there. But also we did some solar panels and generator installation for home and village lighting. And we did lots of local projects. Not all of our students could afford to travel internationally, but lots of our students were willing to go on weekends down into our neighbouring communities and do projects. So we did lots of things there. Drinking water hookups, community revitalization projects, entrepreneurial initiatives to help keep small startup businesses in rural areas, Native American heritage site infrastructure, school garden and greenhouse project, middle school baseball field construction. We also did engagement in STEM schools, middle schools, and then we did a big project in 3 local counties on water quality and health in rural Alabama. Our phenomenal community partners, it wouldn't have happened without them. It's really important to get together with a community organisation that's trusted in the community, because that opens all kinds of doors for you. HERO, which is the Hale County Empowerment and Revitalisation Organisation, Schoolyard Roots, Sumter County Schools, and for our international projects, we teamed up with Nature and Culture International. Our local projects, we were working in just fabulous communities, just 30 minutes south of our campus in Tuscaloosa. These are strong, connected, resilient communities, but they're really underserved by all measures of poverty, income, economic opportunities, declining population, education, poor access to basic services and healthcare, and from my point of view, severe challenges to safe water treatment and safe drinking water supplies. So we were welcomed into these communities, and some of the highlights of my academic career are the projects that we did with those communities, just as in partnership. So I'll flip through these photos quickly. So we started with, I said, drinking water hookups and just renovation, just getting out and painting fields and fixing playgrounds and baseball fields that needed some repair. There are families in rural Alabama, through no fault of their own, have no drinking water supply, so we did some drinking water hookups as well. We did tornado damage restoration, school garden project. In the background there you can see the greenhouse and the raised beds. We also did a vegetable washing station at a local school, and on the right shows the garden today. In Greensboro, there are lots of rural towns in Alabama where Main Street is basically like a ghost town. We have strip malls outside of towns and maybe local Walmarts that you can drive to within 10 miles, but Hero is really committed to bringing back Main Street USA, and Greensboro, Alabama is a phenomenal example of that. If you ever get a chance, if you're ever driving to the coast in Alabama, stop in Greensboro. It's really inspiring. So we hooked in, and whatever they needed done, we would do on the weekend. This is one of the finished buildings, students celebrating success in one of the buildings that's now a restaurant called the Pie Lab. We then got on to kind of bigger projects where we actually took on the design and build of a baseball field at a middle school. We just took a bare field and ended up with a baseball field, and that took multiple semesters. And again, we had great support from the community, great support from the university in pulling together money to fund this. And the community were just fantastic. They showed up every time. They'd work alongside of us. They fed us. It was just a great experience. Hale County and in the Peruvian Amazon and Vietnam, we did water testing and lab setup, and we trained locals to run labs when we weren't there in those communities. We did water and sewage systems and solar panels as well. And our initial approach was kind of ready, aim, fire. We kind of leapt into this because it was appealing and the students wanted to do it. So we kind of jumped in and said to the community, what do you need? And they'd tell us what we need, and we'd do it. And then we'd scratch together funding with the help of community affairs, complete the project with the community, and then maybe we should assess and publish this. Well, it's a bit too late to assess when you're at the end of the project. And as engineers, we don't even know the language of assessment. We know how to get things done, dig holes, do percolation tests, but coming up with a survey that doesn't offend anybody and make sense, I mean, that would be hard for us. So that was a struggle for us, and we didn't realize that it was a good idea to maybe ask people for help. So that was kind of where we got off to a slow start. I need to go quickly. So we did projects out of our area of expertise, and we didn't consider the impact on, for me, promotion, but tenure and promotion. That kind of requirement wasn't really considered when we did these. It was mostly a service learning approach. We did publish the work in JCs, and we have an engineering journal for service learning, and also our own environmental, our engineering journal, the American Society of Engineering Education, and also an environmental justice. But then we kind of get in. So what I would say is a better approach is plan around your expertise. So think, what am I good at? What can I offer the community? And then work with the community to come up with projects that really you can really help with and that there isn't a steep learning curve on. Fill knowledge gaps with other people on the team, bring in social scientists, which we did later, but initially we didn't do that. And then think about what's the big proposal you're going to go for. So after you get your seed money and your support from the university, which I hope you have at your university, think about where's the big money going to come from? Because tenure and promotion is all about money and publications, certainly in engineering. Okay, so I think I'll just leave it there. I'll finish off with this slide. Now we have evolved where we have lots of great support for faculty, and some of the really great things that have happened for us was the project seed support. We now have graduate fellowship support for Engaged Scholarship, and that is huge. So you can have your graduate student funded for a year to help do preliminary research and help you write that initial grant. And that's, tuition, healthcare, and support for the grad student. We have travel support for our own technical conference in ES and conferences like this. We've got required reporting in our annual faculty report, so everybody has to do a faculty report at the end of the year. There's now a box in there that you can check, or you're required to check to say, do any of my projects involve service learning? So that's great, really good to emphasize the importance of it to faculty, and also it enables community affairs to bring all that data together so they can map and network people. So if you want to start a project in an area, we now have a database where you can go and see what resources are there, what community groups can I work with, who else, what other faculty are working there. So, faculty are valued, and that's drawing faculty out of our colleges where they're still kind of lagging a bit, but there's enough incentive to where faculty are moving towards community service, and there's good support to help on the tenure and promotion process. Sorry, I ran over. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for organizing this panel. It gave me a good opportunity to think back over my career and sitting in a position where tenure and promotion is a daunting task. I hope we can talk as colleagues this afternoon about positioning yourself well. Okay, so our job today, describe your journey in obtaining tenure and promotion and provide some examples of the support necessary. So my journey actually began with an episode of The Simpsons. There was an episode in 1996, which is 22 years ago, where a brown bear strolls into the streets of Springfield, frightening the town. The bear is subdued by police, but Homer is concerned and convinces Springfield that something needs to be done to protect them from the bears. And the town takes their complaint to Mayor Quimby. Soon the Bear Patrol is created, but Homer then is shocked to see that taxes have been raised $5 to pay for this new initiative. To appease them, Mayor Quimby blames the high taxes on illegal immigrants. Now this is where it gets a little bit prophetic and a little bit creepy. He then creates Proposition 24, which will require all illegal immigrants from Springfield to be deported. Springfield starts to harass its immigrants. I don't know if you can see the sign in Apu's store, "I want you out." A hate is created. A truth has been created by a leader that no one questions. That no one questions if there's a link between illegal immigrants, the increase in taxes, and the Bear Patrol. Apu confides in Homer that his visa expired many years earlier, making him an illegal immigrant, and if Proposition 24 passes, he will have to leave. He goes to Fat Tony to obtain a false United States citizenship, and on it goes. So now we've created a need for illegal activity. Yet still, Proposition 24 passes with 90% of the population voting yes, and groundskeeper Willie was deported. So the Simpsons episodes and other experiences like it, even to present day, made me ask questions that led me to engage scholarship. What would my role as an academic at the University of Springfield be? What is my responsibility in this situation? What is the role of civic engagement? What story needs to be told? What am I willing to do, say, and risk? And if I don't speak up as a public intellectual who has the job to take risks, who will? So with those kinds of questions as an engaged scholar, you put yourself in a particular space. And this is what all of us in this room can do, and I've heard it since I arrived at this conference. We reveal politics, ideology, and values behind decisions, and we encourage opposing viewpoints. We gain real-life experiences and stories, and we share them with faculty and students and our partners. We create meaningful connections and research relationships. We ask unique questions that elicit comments such as, "I've never thought of it that way." We respect the complexity of problems that uphold human dignity. We share and we model how to share power. We use language, we're attentive to language that acknowledges the differences in privilege, sexuality, ethnicity, education, geography, class, etc. And you could add more to this list. As engaged scholars, we have a very unique skill set. So with this way of working, what did I do to obtain tenure and promotion? I worked across campus. I sat on student committees outside of our faculty. I participated in other research institutes. I participated in other faculty initiatives. If somebody needed a member to serve on something, I said yes. I worked across communities, not-for-profit communities, governments, funders, clinician communities, those that would be considered the enemy, those that some people said I was being co-opted by that powerful group. But I did this so you can bring your perspective and their perspectives into the discussions. I invited others outside of the faculty to take my classes, to see how an engaged scholar thinks, to talk about multiple truths, to talk about multiple perspectives, to talk about politics. I joined others on grants, big grants, small grants. to, again, sit at the table and bring the way we participate in the world to those grants. And I contributed in my faculty, because at the end of the day, those are the people who are deciding about your tenure and promotion. So by participating widely, by doing these kind of activities, you become woven into the fabric of your faculty and your university and beyond. Or you become part of a picture that is needed, valued, depended on, and you become the go-to person. But it's not all about what I did, of course. There needs to be external support. And there's actually quite a bit written on changing tenure and promotion processes, and I encourage you to look at that literature if you're just starting to think about this. And a lot of it has to do with involving community members in, on your committees and writing letters and things like that. But we can't dismiss the importance of leadership at all levels. I'm not just talking university level or faculty level. There's leadership positions in every activity and every meeting we have. But those leaders, when I've been asked, what can I do for you, or what do you expect out of me as a leader, I say, I need you to articulate the value of engaged scholarship. I need you to socialize new faculty and new leaders. I need you to speak confidently about it, and I need you to speak up at the critical moments. I have to say, though, that my own faculty is quite unique. I'm in the Faculty of Extension at the University of Alberta, and through our strong leadership of our dean, Dr. Katie Campbell, and this was written, this isn't just because you're here, Katie. I didn't think you'd come. But she really did push she was that leader who spoke up and really did push for changes in our FEC guidelines. And so where we could redefine what impact factor is, right? What changed in the community? You can write what impact factor the journal is, but what did you change in the community? If you have a publication, yes, that's important, but so is getting a news story in your street newspaper. You teach a class, of course we all do, but if you did a workshop with frontline workers or in community, that was considered teaching as well. So really pushing that within the academy was what our leadership did. Also using institutional plans, offices of engagement, equity, diversity, inclusion. We fit so well into those initiatives, and we can become the go-to people in those initiatives. And so institutional plans might not be that engaging, but it's important to kind of take a peek and see where you can situate yourself and insert yourself. Mentorship and collegiality it's just sitting down with junior faculty and saying, do this, don't do this, go here, don't go there, are critical. And using the media, I think we in our faculty become the people, if there's a story somebody needs a story, and the media needs a good story to be told, we're the faculty they come to because they know that we are engaged with community and there's been something going on and we're political, and they'll come to us and say, do you have a story for us? So using the media has been helpful as well. So my journey really didn't start with The Simpsons, but it did by asking those questions of neglected issues and forming relationships. So relationships in a tenure and promotion system matter, and contributing and doing your part, knowing your science, knowing your stuff, being able to stand up and be a respected individual within your academy also is critically important. And knowing your stuff and having good leadership enables you to boldly say that tenure is about academic freedom and the ability to serve students and society. I'll leave it there.
All right, good afternoon. I'm Tracy Eells, University of Louisville. Very pleased to be part of this panel. I am the Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs at the university. I've been in this role since 2011. Prior to that, I was in an administrative job in the School of Medicine at University of Louisville. Started that late 2003. I, by training, am a clinical psychologist. I am a psychotherapy researcher. And I've got a bit of a confession to make right here at the beginning, which was I was nearly a full professor before I even heard of the term engaged scholarship, all right? You know, and part of that is I think that by its very nature, my discipline and the nature of my research and scholarship is applied, is engaged. And I've also found that at the University of Louisville, like I'm sure at your institutions, there are many people who are doing engaged scholarship. Timer's not started here. Am I at 0?
I can restart it if you'd like.
It just is showing 0 here. So anyway, I'm trying to, of course, be mindful of time.
52 seconds. You're only 52 seconds into it.
Okay, did you pause the clock?
You got
All right, all right.
You got
All right.
9 minutes to go.
Where was I? All right. So I think that a lot of us do engage scholarship without necessarily calling that. That's it engaged scholarship. I'm currently on a grant where it's a federally funded grant. It's looking at, what we're doing is we're comparing an internet-based intervention for major depression, cognitive behavioral therapy for intervention, with some telephone-based coaching with treatment as usual. And we're doing this in 4 primary care centers, urban centers in Louisville, and 1 rural center outside of Louisville. What I want to do today, however, is not so much highlight my research, but I want to highlight some of the work of other engaged scholars at the University of Louisville, and perhaps we'll get more to my experience when we get to the discussion section. But I want to continue just by giving you some context to talk just a little bit about, for those who are not familiar with U of L, a little bit about the university. Our mission is to be a nationally recognized metropolitan research university. We're an urban research university. We do have, like many of your institutions, I'm sure, the Carnegie Engaged University designation. We're a very high research institution. We are what I would call a small, large university with a student body of about 22,500 and 13 academic units. Narrowing it down a bit to the community engagement side of the work there, the main point I want to make from this slide, the next one, is there's a lot of community engagement that takes place at the university. This is based on a report out of our Office of the Vice President for Community Engagement, nearly 2,000 discrete activities, and you can see down at the bottom 124 instances of engagement scholarship. I'm going to mention just 5 of those to you today. We have a lot of students who are involved, and these are, the count here is encounters, I think. And then our big initiative is focused, we call it the Signature Partnership, and it is focused on the West End, and it is one of the lowest income zip code areas in the country. So for the past 10, 11 years, we've been focusing on trying to improve the economic and other conditions in that community. All right, so that's a bit of context. In one of our early calls here of our panel, we came up with a set of questions that we would discuss at this panel. We narrowed it down to the 2 that were introduced earlier, but I, with the help of Henry Cunningham, who's in the audience here, our Director of Community Engagement, we identified 5 researchers, and I asked them the following questions, which I will review for you. I'll introduce these scholars, and then very briefly I'm going to talk about their answers to these questions, all right? So first, could you describe your engaged scholarship? Give us examples of projects, publications, presentations, funding. And then how have your students and community partners benefited from your integration of teaching, research, and service? How has your academic environment, the U of L, University of Louisville environment, contributed to your success? What unique challenges have you faced pursuing your engaged scholarship agenda? How have you addressed these challenges? How can the university better support your work as an engaged scholar? How has your engaged scholarship transformed your personal development? And how is your work different because you're doing it through an engaged lens? So we're going to go through the scholars here quickly, and I can't do justice to them based on time, but I want to start with Kelly Kinahan. She's an assistant professor on the tenure track, relatively new, not tenured, and her area, she's in the Department of Urban and Public Affairs, and she studies housing justice. I'm not going to, unfortunately, I can't get into too much more detail there. Laura Callahan in our history department is a public historian. She's done a lot of work locally and also does traditional scholarship in public history. We have a faculty member in our College of Education and Human Development. She is an exercise physiologist. Her primary area of work is neuroplasticity in spinal cord injury, but she introduced this exercise program in a local elementary school and found that 30 minutes of exercise running an obstacle course had some real tangible benefits for those students. And then For Your Child is a project that Armin Perry, tenured professor now in the School of Social Work, is doing, where he is providing fatherhood-specific parent education in 2 or 3 locations in Louisville and testing the outcome of that, all right? And they're still gathering data. And finally, one of our full professors, Anita Berry, and her team of highly collaborative folks, again, in social work, have a $4.8 million grant to study pregnancy prevention interventions. Okay, let me get to the questions now. These start from the top and go down, so when people sort of gave similar answers to these questions, I moved these up to the top. So how have your students and community partners benefited from your integration? And they said it's sort of a two-way integration, that they can introduce their work into the classroom, but also the students are out in the field. They can apply the classroom to the field. So the field to the classroom, classroom to the field. Helps students after they graduate to find jobs and also to advance their education should they wish to. And there was an emphasis on being able to continue this work, sustainability, since they train the community partners sometimes in the interventions that they're doing for those who did work that involved a specific intervention. They received grants that directly fed into the community organizations, all right? And this last one from the public historian honors our communities by helping them and discovering more about their neighborhood history. So what elements of your academic environment have contributed to your success? And this was very important: support, support, support. Support from colleagues, support from deans, support from department chairs. Having a culture of engagement in your sort of local academic environment especially made a big difference, particularly for those who were, I'd say, struggling more with their work, lived in environments that I lived in professionally in environments that I'd say were less supportive, and those that were more successful lived in a culture that supported this. The university's infrastructure, working with students is always a gift, and the department's reputation for engaged scholarship helped one of our folks make a connection. What challenges have you faced? Time and again, time came up. Kind of mixing the rhythms, if you will, the semester rhythms, thank you, 1 minute, of the university with the pace of life in the organizations proved to be a challenge, and bureaucratic stumbling blocks. And then how have you addressed these? Supporting one another, finding a community of like-minded scholars. We were patient, was another comment. Seeking advocates, and moving to a model that try to sort of circumvent some of the bureaucratic stumbling blocks. How can the university better support your work? Increase funding, explicitly acknowledge and raise the level of recognition of community-engaged scholarship in teaching and promotion tenure policy. I'm sure that does not come as a surprise to anyone in the room. And then just having more flexibility to facilitate the work of engaged scholarships. And then perhaps establishing an office that focused specifically on this type of research as opposed to, say, more conventional extramurally funded NIH, NSF, et cetera, research, which may have rules that are perfectly appropriate for that kind of a grant, but may not apply to the community engaged scholarship work. Finally, how has it transformed your personal development? And the theme that came out most strongly to me is just the very deep sense of satisfaction. And I can connect to this too in my work that these scholars get from their work. It directly changed lives, were comments that some of them gave. I love what I do. When I feel supported in my full professional self, I absolutely thrive. And so I'm going to move on because my time was probably up. How is your work different because you were doing it through an engaged lens, more interdisciplinary, more immediately useful, can see the impact immediately? Some of them, maybe more like me, are in fields where it's a more natural fit, so it's sort of hard to say. They, were drawn to this work and found a field where it fit. And I want to thank our community engaged scholars for their help in me putting this together. These are their names. Laura Kellen, you might see her at this conference. She's here. She's at another panel right now that she's chairing. I want to thank, again, Henry Cunningham for his help in putting this together. And once again, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Tracy, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm Andy Furcal from the University of Minnesota, and I wear a couple of hats. I spend most of my time as Associate Vice President for Public Engagement, overseeing the university's community engaged research, teaching, and outreach agenda in the Provost's office. And then I spend part of my time as a full professor in the Department of Organizational Leadership Policy and Development in the College of Education and Development, and I'm specifically in the higher ed program. And what I like to do is just give a little bit of context about my work, how I do it, but more importantly, some tips about how to, lessons learned about working my way to becoming a full professor, and also what I'm doing about this promotion and tenure issue as an Associate VP for Public Engagement. So a little bit about my work. I am a professor of higher education, and my interests have been around educational reform. Across the educational spectrum, I've worked a lot in K-12 schools, educational reform, as well as higher education. Been very interested in student development, student outcomes, specifically around pedagogical and instructional strategies for enhancing student learning. And that brought me to service learning and community and experiential learning practices. And that's how I got involved in work on community engagement. So my work is about community engagement. My scholarship is about studying community engagement as a topic of inquiry, as a subject of inquiry. And the assumption there is that because I study community engagement, my work is done through a community engaged approach, and that I am an engaged scholar. And I would say that a portion of my work is engaged, but a large portion of my work is not engaged. It's not done through an engaged lens. And I say this because it's been very important to me, because I don't think I would be a full professor today if all of my work had been done as an engaged scholar. I started my career at UC Berkeley in the Graduate School of Education, and began working my way up as a faculty member, and then moved to the University of Minnesota, where I ultimately was promoted to full professor. And part of the expectations at these institutions, are that there are certain kinds of levels of inquiry and certain bodies of knowledge and information that have to be produced to be advanced. This is true of everyone within these institutions. Things like peer-reviewed journals and impact factors, large-scale studies, large grants, all matter and all count. In the University of Minnesota, we receive points. We receive a score every year for our productivity. 40% for research, 40% for teaching, 20% for service. And grants count for a certain amount, and teaching counts for a certain amount, and advisement, et cetera. And we get points. And the bigger the grant, the more the points, let me tell you that. So part of the challenge has been to navigate as someone who studies community engagement as an engaged scholar in this work. Now, like I said, some of my work has been traditional scholarship about issues that have not been engaged. I've done some large-scale studies. I'm working on one right now from U.S. Department of Education, a 4-year study looking at the role of community-engaged practices to enhancing the educational success of underrepresented students. And so we're looking at students who entered at a particular time. We're following them over a 4-year period. We're looking at different cohorts. We're using propensity score matching. It's not engaged scholarship. It is about community engagement. On the other hand, I've done some work with K-12 schools on character development, where the teachers and the principals and even the students were involved in crafting the instruments, designing the treatment, the character development programs, helping us even interpret the data where we thought the data meant one thing, and they said, no, this is what we believe the data are saying and telling us. And those were engaged experiences. And I think that this is important to note for me, because the way the work was presented when I was submitting my portfolios was very important for me to think about what is the larger purpose around the engaged scholarly work that I was doing. What I think we oftentimes see, and I see this in reviewing portfolios for promotion and tenure, is that there's thick descriptions about the community engagement experiences. We worked in these communities, we addressed these particular issues, we built these partnerships, but what doesn't come to the fore oftentimes is what was the scholarship that was produced from that, and how does this piece of scholarship tie to a larger set of inquiry that we are seeking? What is the body of work that qualifies us as a scholar to go forward for promotion? And this is where I think we need to extract from our engaged scholarship the significance, the impact, the relevance. When we look at our promotion tenure guidelines, those are the things that we're asked to respond to. What is the significance of the work to the discipline? What is the impact of the work to the discipline? What is the relevance of the work to the discipline? We need to speak to those things and then to say, and in addition, we see impacts on the communities. We see relevance for our communities. And those are the things we need to extract. So one of the things that I want to point out, I have 5 quick lessons learned, and one of them is that applying engagement and using engagement to talk about it in a way of enhancing the quality of our research. I think one of the things that has been helpful for me in advancing around with my community engaged work is to say, because we did this through a community engaged lens, the result of that research was of higher quality. We were able to build more valid instruments where we had the survey we were giving out year after year, a civic responsibility survey. A question was, I believe it's important to contribute to my community. That was a standard question we had. When we sat down with community members, they say, what do you mean by contribute? We thinking of service, right? What do you mean by contribute? Time, money. What do you mean about my community, my neighborhood, my ethnic community? So here is an instrument that we were validating on false assumptions about what that item really meant. So working with the community strengthened the quality of our research, and talking about that in our scholarly portfolios becomes important. Another thing is about, like I said, connecting it to the broader body of work, not to see these as discrete initiatives, but something that's contributing to a larger set of understandings. The other thing is teasing out the language that is in the P&T guidelines, like significance, impact, relevance, and talking about this work in those terms. I also have to say, and I say this to some of our junior scholars, is we have to play the game to some extent. I've seen faculty at our university who only do community engaged work, and they say, this is what I want to do, and I'm only going through an engaged lens, and then they don't make it. And so wherever we are situated, we have norms and standards and expectations, and we have to some extent, play the game. And so that's an important piece of advice, and to the extent that we can take our engaged work and have it be part of this larger set of expectations, that's where we can become successful. And we have to nudge our way towards that definition and the work that we do. And then I would say that we have to have a spine around this, as R.T. Ryback said this morning, for what one believes. There comes a point where if this is not the right institution for us, for the work we have to do, we have to be willing to step away and move to a place that does embrace the work. 9, I'm out of time?
No, you have a minute and a half left.
Okay, I'll take 2.5 minutes, how's that? So I very quickly want to just say a couple of things. We do have a university definition, which there's a lot of rhetoric around this work, and we've been trying to institutionalize this work in P&T. We had a group that looked at the analysis of promotion and tenure guidelines at our institution. We did revise our promotion tenure guidelines in 2007 to include engaged scholarship, and we asked this group to look at every single promotion tenure guideline in every department on our campus. We asked them, what's the term or terms used for the engagement work? Is community engagement tied primarily to research, teaching, or service sections of the guidelines? And then we asked, how is it presented? Is it expected? Is it encouraged? Is it required? So quickly, what did we find? I'm happy to share this with you. We found 38 proxy terms used across the guidelines. So how we talk about this work varies from discipline to discipline. How I talk about it in my discipline of higher education is very different than how someone in the arts might talk about this work. So being attentive, so don't co-opt language that's out there in our field of engaged scholarship. Use the language that's in our discipline and tie it to the engagement work, because these terms are very different. Commercialized products, some would say that's not engagement. Well, if in your field commercialized products are important, you want to tie it to commercialized product and talk about how there are mutual benefits and reciprocity and those kinds of things. So these are some more of the terms. Where did it appear in, there were 124 mentions, thank you, Nina. Where do you think it appeared the most? Really? You're absolutely right. 62% of the terms were there, okay? We did see some in research and teaching. And then we found that there were some, lots of rhetoric around the importance of this, but didn't trickle down to actual practice. We found that also that there's a lot of terms that are used interchangeably, which caused a lot of confusing. And this language about not holding community engaged scholarship to a lower standard. So there is this pervasive perception out there in many fields that this work is less rigorous. So part of our job as engaged scholars is to demonstrate the rigors that went into that scholarly work, that inquiry, the systematic inquiry, logical chain of reasoning, all the things that qualify for great scholarship regardless of the methods or approaches that we're using. So with that, I'll end my comments and turn over to Lynnette. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm the last one, and thank you for being so patient with us as we talk about our, just the things that we have gone through and some lessons we've learned that we want to pass on to others. So my area is dance and motor development, and so I started my journey a long time ago. I wanted to start with this quote. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, is the only thing that ever has. So I think sometimes we get so caught up in kind of the weeds of making this work count, we kind of forget about the big picture of why we're doing it, why it's so important. So I actually started as an elementary school teacher, and researcher and choreographer. While I was working on my master's thesis, I decided to teach 2 groups of beginning readers. That's my school, Van Ness Elementary School in Washington, D.C. And I taught one group a traditional way, the vocabulary and comprehension of stories, and the other group through movement. And after comparing the results, pre-tests, post-tests, I found that my movement group improved and gained significantly more in their comprehension and their understanding of the vocabulary words than the group taught in that traditional way. And this was a long time ago. But that was an important discovery for me, to see in action the impact of movement and dance on these beginning readers who love to move. I also worked with my students. I combined history and dance, and my young students toured several schools and were able to teach about the history of Black dance in America through their performance. Then I moved to higher education. And when I was completing my doctorate, I still felt very compelled to work across disciplines and find connections between dance and psychology and history and science and education. Not what a scholar does, right? We're supposed to be very focused on one thing. But I became socialized in what it means to be a university professor, the importance of attaining grants, of publishing in top journals. And I saw that suddenly the needs of the community or application of knowledge seemed just not to be as important, at least if I wanted a tenure track position. So as a new faculty member, I took advantage of several professional development opportunities. I became a faculty fellow for the Michigan Campus Compact, mentored by David Cooper and others. A Lilly Fellow, this was a teaching, learning about collaborative active learning strategies. And I could begin to see my work as a public scholar, where my research teaching service, it kind of aligned with this disciplinary focus as well as community assets and in the area of education and culture. So my engaged scholarship, as I began to prepare for promotion and tenure, I did the things thought I needed to do, my journal articles, book chapters, choreography. I wrote grants, I did presentations. But I did still struggle on how to articulate this work in a way that made sense and spoke to the importance of this approach to people in my department. And at this point, I was with a group of people in kinesiology and motor development, and then I discovered Boyer. It was kind of interesting because Scholarship Assessed had just been published at that time, and I was putting my materials together. And so I looked at what did it mean to do this kind of work in a way that I could explain it so that it was clear. Now, I was not that successful, I must admit, because I really felt I was still kind of at the beginning of trying to figure this out for myself and for others. But I was at Michigan State University. And I was very fortunate to be in a culture of acceptance and support for community-engaged scholarship, thanks to people like Hy Fitzgerald and continuing with the work with Bert Birkenstock and Diane Dulbernick and Lori Van Edgren, and led by our president, Luana Simon, who at the time was provost and then became president, and was a huge proponent of community engagement as a singular approach of a land-grant university. So I began to, with their support and understanding, be able to talk about my work. And I did get tenure, and I also advanced to full professor at Michigan State University. But how to couch it in terms to demonstrate the rigor that Andy talked about, that the peer review, the importance of this work, and not only through, I wrote grants, but I published as well as the work in the community. So one of the areas, one example would be my work in editing a series of dance research books. So that would be engaged service. Also engaged research and creative activities, and I continue to do that work today. This was a collaboration on teaching about the color conventions through theater and dance, and we've taken that project internationally as well as nationally as a way of demonstrating understanding through an art form, and then through teaching with service learning as well as community-engaged research and projects like the Arts Bridge Scholars Program, where students go into the schools and integrate science and math and social studies through the arts. So this approach, and I think more and more about it, how I can help other people, not only to create projects, but to create projects that have rigor. And so it means that some of these areas need to be integrated, the community needs identified, your disciplinary expertise is there are measurable impacts. We have the co-creation, co-implementation, co-assessment, co-dissemination, and that it can be judged to be significant by panel peers. And those peers could be peers from your university or other universities or community partners, because it really matters in that way. And so dissemination is important to academic audiences as well as to public audiences in the work that we do. And now as an administrator, I have kind of come full circle in this work and thinking about not only how I can continue doing this, but how we can help our faculty and others do this work. I help to direct a community engagement initiative at our university. I help them to work through the Carnegie classification. And so we have many projects now that are going on in the areas that you see there. We have a partnership for arts and culture where we have found many ways of integrating our work into the community with a focus on social issues. So we have a small grants program that enables a faculty member to connect with a community partner in the arts and on social issues. So I definitely use this definition from the Carnegie classification that it needs to be a collaboration, it needs to be mutually beneficial, and it should be a partnership. In my role now, I'm also working with our P&T documents, looking at our faculty handbook, making sure that not only are we looking at scholarship, but that crosses the mission, but also engagement. Because prior to the change, in our handbook, we talked about scholarship, teaching, and service, as if scholarship was only research. And so it's like this two-pronged approach that we're taking, that we can be scholarly across the missions, and we also can be engaged. So to becoming an engaged scholar, study the literature, participate in professional development, engage with communities, and advocate for the inclusion of engaged scholarship at your university. Because, without a doubt, a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, is the only thing that ever has. But if we're not able to support our faculty in this work and make sure that the work they do is valued, we are not going to be able to help them to achieve this. So thank you very much.
So at this point, the panelists invite questions, comments about their sharings, and reminding us that they were asked to describe their academic and personal journey and to provide recommendations. And so you yourself might want to connect to those two questions in addition to posing questions to the panelists.
Yeah. I guess my question is, I'm sure on the campuses, folks who are interested in this type of engaged scholarship are probably in the minority. So it's kind of a funny kind of question, but do people walk up to you and whisper and say, why are you doing this? How accepted is it, and how do people on the campus who might be interested know that this is an interest of yours, and how do they approach you about getting involved?
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would say that I was just listening to the panelists, and, you know, you talked about how this is probably the most important work, right? They feel as though, especially new faculty, that they want their work to matter. They want to make a difference. And our students definitely want to do this kind of work. They come from doing service learning in their high schools, and they are ready. I think we're really at this kind of tipping point of we have to make sure that when they get into these departments and these disciplines, that they're not going to, you know, just be destroyed, because that can happen. And what can we do to help that? So I would say we're at this difficult period where we have so many who want to do it, but we haven't made all the changes in our promotion and tenure to make it happen. But I feel confident that we can get there.
To add to that, you know, I think about a university like mine, which is highly decentralized. You know, we've had a promotion tenure guidelines change in 2007 around engagement. It's still trickling down, but not fully. We have a lot of rhetoric, a lot of talk about engagement. We have a lot of opportunities for engaged workshop, but then I talk to faculty who feel like they're the only ones who do this work. So part of what our roles, I think, in administration who are championing this work is to build some visibility around it, to elevate it, to spotlight those who are doing the work so that others can see that there are other colleagues who are interested and are immersed in this work. And so one of the things we did recently, which, you know, has really taken off, is we developed a Community Engaged Scholar Directory. We reached out to all the people who come to our events and participated in our Engaged Scholarship workshops, et cetera, over the last several years, and said, we're building a directory, would you like to be on this directory? So with their picture and their link. We started out with about, 300 or so, and it's over 400. And people, ever since that went online, people said, why am I not on there? I'm an engaged scholar. And so again, it's part of building a critical mass. So institutionalizing this work takes a critical mass as a first phase of effort, and building that visibility becomes important. So spotlighting, highlighting it is a role that we have to play.
That's not been quite so much of an issue for me. I think, as I said, given the nature of my scholarship as a psychotherapy researcher, I would say that biomedical research, being in a medical school, even in a psychiatry department, biomedical approaches and pharmacological studies are generally considered more prestigious and easier to get funding in than a psychosocial intervention. However, I was fortunate in that the leadership of my department did welcome psychotherapy researchers. I would say just more generally as a response to your question, Samurai, is I'm a bit of an odd bird, I would say, in that a psychologist in a department of psychiatrists, a PhD in a department with MDs, you're already somewhat marginalized, as welcoming as they were. And then psychiatry in a medical school, where psychiatry itself is a discipline that's somewhat marginalized. And yet I found a way to become the Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs of the medical school. I found a way to now report to the provost of the university. So how did all that happen? One, luck, you know. But the other one is, I would say, relationship building, networking, let people know what you're doing, connecting, you know, developing, relationships with colleagues who respect the work you're doing, and together with you can help promote that work. Be persistent, and I wrote down here, adapt, but don't be co-opted. All right, because I've certainly adapted, but I have not been co-opted.
I think, yes, you get sought out. But actually, when I think about it, those emails that I get are primarily from students who've had a bad experience with their supervisor or in their faculty or their department with an engaged scholar. So I think, in my context anyway, lots of people are getting on the engagement train. There's funding for it, there's funding for partnerships, and everybody is somehow cobbling it together really quickly so that they can go for some big grants, for big partnership grants, big engaged grants. And so all of a sudden now we have a whole bunch of people who are experts in engaged scholarship. And you know you're not an expert in engaged scholarship when you're in community and things are going very poorly. And you're picking up the pieces, right? And there's a lot of damage being done, and there's hurt relationships, and we know. And so I think you become known as the person who can go in and mend and support and say to that student who's been, in our context, it would be in a northern indigenous community, on her own, figuring this out, and she's struggling. So you become the person who goes in there and says, okay, let's step back, let's start from square one, and so I know it's a bit of a circuitous answer, but I think I am concerned about everybody doing engaged work, encouraging everybody to do engaged work. Let's all do engaged work, and then it is a really unique skill set, and you have to give everything to your students and everything to those community members and your partners. And I'm a little bit cautious of to what extent do we encourage the activity, I guess.
I would agree with everything that's gone before, and I would say that for myself, up through tenure, no one knew who I was on campus. It's not very sexy to read about the kinetics of the sorption of pollutants onto filter media, but once we started doing Engineers Without Borders and projects, it was, as people have said, very newsworthy. We have multiple organisations on campus that recognise faculty in this way, and it's very high-profile recognition. So we've got community affairs that have, a banquet, an award ceremony every year. It's a big deal on campus. The speakers are flown in from around the country. It's a really big deal, and so faculty are really valued in that, and word gets out. We also have another initiative, Service Learning Initiative. They give out faculty awards, and then there's the student bodies that recognise exceptional student groups. And when you read about the kind of projects our students do, they always just rise to the top. The students are always getting prizes. So, all of a sudden, you're kind of like known on campus. Even today in the elevator, someone from Alabama who I didn't know said, "Oh yeah, you're the person who does all that work with the Engineers Without Borders." So, it's been huge that way. The difficulty is, what is your committee? What does your departmental committee think about it? What does your college committee? What does your dean think about it? And you have to not lose yourself in thinking you're wonderful, and also think about, playing the game, as it was said, what's expected of you to progress at this university. And I think, if I could have a magic wand and just wave it, I'd say when US News and World Reports decides to evaluate universities by engagement scholarship as well as PhD, produced, then we'll start to see real institutional change. But, we've come a long way and we're still in transition. But I think, it's so much better now than it was, when I didn't have gray hair.
So thanks for the panel. This is very useful. I'm an associate dean at my school, so I'm asked to give advice to young faculty, many of whom see themselves as engaged scholars, and some of them have an easy time with the merit promotion system, some of them do not. And I give some version of the kind of advice, Andy, you were describing, you have to pay the coin of the realm in some fashion, in some part of your work. On the other hand, many of these young scholars, they're not tied to disciplines. And so I was struck by, you're kind of putting that part of the device as sort of the acknowledgement of the discipline and the disciplinary standards, and many of them, define themselves very interdisciplinarily in their own kind of self ideal and training and what they bring to the work. So they don't personally have strong ties to disciplines per se in the way that an older generation of faculty probably had. So I guess I'm torn in this tension between that kind of accountability to disciplines and what that means, and the community accountability, which all of these faculty resonate with very easily, and how we navigate that tension going forward.
I would just say this is a conundrum and tension that we face in higher education, because we are organized by disciplines. Or businesses are organized by functions, we're organized by disciplines. And the shifts in disciplines ultimately are what's going to make engaged scholarship acceptable and legitimate. And I think about disciplines like women's studies, sexuality studies, ethnic studies, which are inherently interdisciplinary, which took many years to gain legitimacy as disciplines, and that have a theory base and are appropriate for inquiry. And I think the notion of interdisciplinarity is becoming more accepted. And in fact, in many cases, it's becoming required. And when we are hired within a discipline, this is where I think we get trapped, to have them make some contribution to that department or that discipline. And that's where I think, unless we see these structural changes in how we organize our institution or broaden those disciplines more, then I think we are going to be trapped in this conundrum of how do we present this work in our scholarly portfolios without talking about our discipline in particular, even though the people in the discipline are the ones who are going to review it. So it's a large systemic issue.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, I was going to say many programs are now looking at cluster hires, where you have then a group of faculty from a variety of disciplines that are focused on a larger problem. And I think that's probably kind of a way of the future, that we will begin to acknowledge the importance of engaging our work in these bigger issues. And to do that, a problem needs to be solved with through multiple lenses.
I'll add a comment. I appreciate the advice you give to your faculty, and that Andy suggests. I gave the exact, and still do give the exact same advice. And I'm also thinking about our plenary presentation this morning with Mr. Ryback's talk, and how we really have to rethink higher ed. We have to rethink some of the categories, and we have to rethink, even the disciplines that we work with. And to me, it's so natural to think of my discipline, but I recognize that may not be the future of higher ed. At the same time, when we're giving advice to young, early career faculty, I'm reminded of a book I read years ago when I didn't know who John McPhee was, but he wrote a profile of Bill Bradley, the great Princeton basketball player, New York Knicks, titled A Sense of Where You Are. You have to have a sense of where you are. You have to know the rules that you're living under now, not necessarily the rules that maybe will help you when you're of an age. Would you be asked to serve on a panel like this? Okay, so it is a tension.
Both comments really relate to what I want to ask. I'm Jorge Atiles, Oklahoma State University, and I am concerned for higher education, for our future, because right now other forces are the ones that are trying to change us because we're not taking the initiative to change academia. And you touched on some of those. Andy, you talk about, you got to play the game because those are the norms that exist. But how, in an environment that is supposed to be based on faculty governance, can we actually bubble up sufficient change to really have the answers to the most critical issues that are affecting our world. So, reflecting on your comments about time, it takes time. We typically have our faculty, at the first year, we try to protect them. We're only gonna give you one class so you can focus on developing your research focus and all that. But most of the times our faculty comes straight from the university, right? They may have not had a job in the real world out there, in their discipline. So how do we actually take that first year and think about it differently? So now I'm talking about how do we change the norm? How do we change the practice? How do we start the clock a year later? But that first year is dedicated for that faculty to connect with the communities that will provide the basis for their research, the basis for how do they develop syllabi that are really reflecting the real world, but in the classroom. So I want to hear your ideas. How do we really change this? Because something has to change.
I don't sure have all the answers, but
That's an easy question.
it's very easy. But I was thinking about one thing that, when I was at Michigan State, we actually did called Meet Michigan. And all new faculty, we got on the bus and we went to all these different places to see the connections that were made with groups throughout the state and to think about how our research and our work could connect in that way. And if I hadn't had that tour, I probably would not have left the campus really for that year. So I instituted that at the University of Delaware. And even though Delaware is like 10 times smaller than Michigan, it was a similar situation. The faculty had really, they said they would not have left that area if that tour hadn't been integrated. So that's one. But I think, thinking about how to help them professional development as they create their own portfolio is important.
I would just say very quickly that I don't think we can change the system. I think we can nudge the system forward. Little by little, I see where we've had leaders, presidents who have come into institutions who have tried to change them, and then they don't last very long. Because these institutions don't change. We're not nimble enough as institutions of higher education. But I think little by little, if we just take a step forward, we nudge a little, we do a little bit more engaged work, over time, it's going to have an impact. And I think that's the strategy we've been using over the last 15 years. We've been trying to do it, and now we're finally reaping the rewards of that, nudging it forward very slowly, looking at the long term, the long vision of that.
I just want to be alive when it happens. Very impatient person.
Touche.
I'll just add, I am in an admin role now as well, and I remember it came to me really vividly where I was like, oh, now it's my responsibility to take risks for those junior faculty. It's my responsibility to speak up. It was quite, you can sit back in a lot of different meetings and nod, and then it became a real responsibility to me to say whatever venue I'm at, it is my responsibility to say, absolutely not. This is a junior scholar, and we can put the person up for an award for this, and it became my responsibility to put forth those scholars to say, outstanding, they got a new, publication, or put them out for a community award, a mayor's award, a city award, and really strategize about taking that individual and speaking about them, knowing their work, being able to speak well about their work, and I'm afforded a very privileged position in my institution, and I have tenure, and I am a full professor, and now it is my responsibility to speak up, and there's no repercussion really. Maybe some people won't like me or won't ask me to be on the committee. There's others to serve on, and so I think I'm at that place in my career where I can be risky and say risky things.
I would just like to add that I think that what it seems that we're doing now, we're in a different place than we were 10 years ago. Now we are administrators are doing things that shorten the amount of time that it takes to make that connection and get that successful project working. And you talked about, going out and meeting the community. We also do that at Alabama, where faculty are encouraged to do the tour. It's a multi-day tour, and you go and communities introduce themselves to you, and they show you the work that they're doing, this fabulous work that's being done out in the community, and you have the opportunity to figure out where you're going to fit into that work. So that, before that took a long time to figure out, where are the people, what are they doing? But all of that's being done now. So it is a lot easier for faculty in terms of time, but there's, and I think we just need to keep going and figuring out what the next obstacles are and knocking those down as we go.
I think it does, can you hear me? I think it does take leadership, but I agree that they call politics the art of the possible. I'd say the same for administration and higher ed. It's the art of the possible. It's kind of pushing the envelope, but don't break through the envelope. In the final analysis, anyone getting promotion and tenure must persuade their colleagues, their faculty colleagues. The faculty essentially make the decision. I mean, the deans and the provosts, endorse those decisions. They have a strong voice, but ultimately to change, you have to change the culture, and you do that incrementally.
We have time for one last question, and as soon as Russia is answers, would you?
It's a quick one. I love the provocative questions. I think this is a quick, pragmatic one. Appreciate the specific tips for junior faculty that a couple of you laid out. Is there, beyond the general literature, a place you can point for exemplars of portfolios, of policies written in rank and tenure committees, other things of those sorts that faculty can go to?
So as part of the Academy for Community Engagement Scholarship, there's a white paper that's being produced that's looking at how different disciplines, the pathways through which particular disciplines reach engaged scholarship. So some have much more of a participatory, community-based participatory frame. Some have more participatory democracy frame, so they're looking at about societal aspects in the sustaining of our democracy. Others look at it more about the public intellectual, the public scholar. So the different framings become important for helping individual scholars situate themselves in this broader engaged scholarship field, and all those lead pathways. So there are some exemplars in terms of P&T guidelines that many institutions put together. I think ESC has some somewhere. I think Michigan State's developed some. I would be happy if you exchange cards, be happy to share some of those links for you. There's also exemplars of P&T portfolios of engaged scholars that have been successful, and because part of it is how to craft that portfolio in a way that brings out the work while also meeting all the standards and norms of the expectations for the P&T.
So I would just like to say, we have a scholarship committee that's part of the Engaged Scholarship Consortium, and we want to make sure we have materials that are going to be helpful. So if you have suggestions or needs, we'd like to hear from you. We are going to have a small grants program where we'll provide $5,000 for faculty to conduct an engaged scholarship project. But this is the time for us to know what we can do to help you at your universities.
I've got somebody dying for just this, they're just trying to squeeze one more in. So I think after this, we'll say thank you.
First, I want to say thank you. I'm a brand new tenure track professor. This has been very enlightening for me. But I have a question that hasn't been answered, and that is, have you ever come across any programs to help scaffold new faculty into the legal ramifications of community engaged scholarship? I've already run into it as like very real legal risks for the work I'm doing around resource projects. And sometimes a PowerPoint presentation finds its way into a public hearing or a legal or an actual lawsuit. So I wonder if that's come up on your radar at all, and what recommendations you have about that.
I don't think that's just a tenure track issue. I think it's a broader issue in today's times with a lot of, we administrators get caught in that a lot as well. I think there are efforts on campuses now to look at risk management for a variety of different things, not just community engagement. So I don't know what the possibilities are on your campus. But I can share with you what we're trying to do on our campus around that. And to what extent it's specifically about faculty work, I'm not sure, but I know we're dealing with a lot of things that risk management.
No, we have the human subjects are the research compliance offices that we really do need to connect more with, because this is certainly an area that we need, and we have lawyers on our campuses. You bring up a great point that I'm going to write down that we need to do some work on. So thank you for bringing that to us.
Just very quickly, if I may, there are examples, I'd say more broadly in scholarship, of a person's scholarship sort of being used against them. And one particularly interesting example, I just read yesterday an article in Vox about a classics of all disciplines scholar at Denison University whose work on property rights in Greek society were used as an argument to get her off a panel that was exploring Title IX violations at her university. And what she had studied is how, when the husband died, the wife apparently becomes a citizen. Otherwise, it's an all-male citizenship. But these distant male relatives of the husband would sometimes make claims to disqualify the wife based on no evidence whatsoever. And her scholarship was used in an attempt, a failed attempt to get her off a jury or a panel. And so, fortunately, the judge threw that out, but I thought it was an interesting article.
Not the answer, but I know in a lot of our projects, we either develop a charter or an MOU or something that talks about, okay, communications. Anything that comes out from our partnership, whether it be a policy brief or a one-pager or a PowerPoint, who has to, which systems does it have to go through for approval, or more importantly, which ones doesn't it have to go through, and how do we basically go through everything that could possibly go wrong and say, how are we going to handle this? And we've revisited that charter a lot when the going gets tough, and we say, okay, what did we say we were going to do? What did we say we were going to do with this document? What did we say we were going to do with publications? What did we say? And so it gets you thinking about the issues right at the beginning of all of the things that possibly could go wrong, and put in place a lot of okay, if this, then that stuff for our partnerships. So we were able to kind of maneuver around some of the difficult issues that might have come up.
I think it's a really excellent question, and I have lost sleep worrying about, even though I worry about OSHA safety, for example, or, for example, one of our students got amoebic dysentery in Vietnam. So, even though you give them a safety brief before you start the project, you get them to sign that they've received safety training, you just kind of wonder what's going to happen to you at the university and the legal level if a kid walks into a backhoe, even though he's had the safety briefing. And I don't know that we're totally protected as faculty. I've talked to our legal department. They seem to think that if I give the safety briefing and they sign the safety briefing, but you do worry about that kid that slept in and came in late, missed the safety briefing. So it is something that plays in the back of your mind. And having served as an expert witness, I can see what lawyers can do to people once they get your, forms and sheets up in front in court. They can, nitpick things away to where they can make you look responsible. So I can't put your mind at ease because it is a concern of mine as well. But I think you just have to do what you can and consult with your lawyers as you launch this. And, you can refer back to them. If you consulted with them, they've given you this advice. That's the best thing I can say.
So with that, please join me in thanking our engaged scholars.